The starship descended through the thick atmosphere of Kepler 442b like a blade cutting through water. Zixter stood at the viewport with hands folded behind their back, watching the planet grow larger below. The ancient Valorian diplomat had visited hundreds of worlds in their 2,000 years of life. Each visit was the same. Each colony of inferior species followed the same pattern of struggle and eventual failure. This human settlement would be no different. The landing platform shook slightly as the massive ship touched down. Zixter could see the welcoming party already gathering through the viewport. Humans. Small, fragile creatures with soft skin and short lifespans. They moved with clumsy efficiency, their bodies requiring constant attention and care. The Valorians had transcended such weaknesses millennia ago. Captain Marcus Powell stood at the front of the group, his face marked with the sun damage that came from living on a world with stronger radiation. Powell extended his hand in the human greeting ritual. Zixter moved forward with deliberate slowness. The captain's grip was firm but temporary. Good. The human understood the nature of formal encounters. "Welcome to Settlement 7, Powell said, his voice carrying the confidence of a man who had survived the journey across the stars. "We are honored to receive the Galactic Council's inspection team." Zixter's translator rendered the words into Valorian concepts, though the meaning seemed unnecessarily emotional. Honor was not a rational response to an inspection visit. It was simply necessary procedure. "I am Zixter, Senior Diplomatic Observer for the Valorian Council," the alien replied. The words came through a voice modulator, making them sound hollow and precise. "Your colony appears structurally sound. I will conduct a standard evaluation of your technological progress and resource management." Powell's smile did not fade, though Zixter detected a slight tension in the human's jaw. The captain gestured toward a waiting transport vehicle. "We have prepared quarters for your team. A full briefing begins at sunrise." The settlement itself was typical of human colonies. Prefabricated structures stood in organized rows, interconnected by covered pathways that protected inhabitants from environmental hazards. Solar panels stretched across the rooftops, and Zixter immediately calculated their efficiency rating. Disappointing. The Valorians had surpassed this technology 400 years ago. The tour began at the medical facility. Dr. Nathan Hayes explained their surgical systems and pharmaceutical production methods. Zixter examined the equipment with cold appreciation. The humans had copied Valorian medical designs almost exactly, though with inferior materials and construction. When Hayes mentioned that they had saved 43 lives using these methods in the past year, Zixter registered the statement without emotion. Of course, lives were saved. That was the function of medical equipment. Efficiency was expected. The agricultural sector was similarly unremarkable. Engineer Lisa Warner showed Zixter the hydroponic gardens where humans grew food in controlled environments. The yield calculations were adequate, but nothing more. Warner spoke with genuine passion about the crop rotations and nutrient solutions, explaining how the team had adapted earth plants to Kepler soil conditions. Zixter noted the work with professional detachment. This was problem solving, nothing more. All species eventually learned to feed themselves or faced extinction. As the sun lowered on the horizon, Powell invited Zixter to a community dinner. This was the part of the inspection that Zixter found most tiresome. Humans insisted on sharing meals and engaging in social rituals that served no practical purpose. The Valorians had eliminated such inefficiencies from their culture long ago. The dining hall was crowded with humans of all ages. Children ran between tables while adults prepared food and set out drinks. The noise was constant and distracting. Zixter sat at a central table with Powell and several other colony leaders. Around them, humans embraced each other, laughed at private jokes, and touched each other frequently in casual physical contact. Wasteful, Zixter thought. Pure emotional expenditure with no return. Powell introduced Zixter to the other humans at the table. Lieutenant Grace Murphy, the security chief, spoke about defending the colony from environmental dangers. Engineer Derek Chun talked about the structural reinforcements he had designed to withstand seismic activity. Biologist Jennifer Walsh discussed her research into adapting human crops for long-term sustainability. Each human seemed to believe their individual work mattered beyond its practical contribution to survival. Then, a young human boy, no more than 7 years old, approached the table. Powell lifted the child onto his lap without hesitation. The boy was not Powell's son, but was introduced as Tommy, a child without parents who had died during the colony's early years. Powell held him with obvious affection as the meal continued. Zixter observed this interaction with analytical interest. The captain was expending energy and resources on a human that contributed nothing to colony survival. By pure logic, such investment was irrational. And yet Powell held the boy as if he were his own offspring, and the surrounding humans watched with what appeared to be approval and warmth. After the meal, humans moved to sitting areas where they shared stories. A woman named Carol spoke about Earth, the human homeworld. She described oceans and mountains, thunderstorms and snow. Other humans listened with expressions of longing and sadness, though Earth existed millions of miles away and they would never return to it. They invested emotion in an impossible nostalgia. Powell found Zixter standing alone, observing the gathering from a distance. "What do you think of our settlement?" the captain asked. "Your colony functions adequately," Zixter replied. "Your infrastructure is sound. Your technological implementations are derivative but competent. Your resource management shows acceptable efficiency." "That's not what I asked," Powell said. His voice was gentle but contained a challenge. "I asked what you think of our settlement. Not the buildings or the equipment. The people. The community." Zixter considered this carefully. The question itself revealed typical human imprecision. Buildings and equipment were measurable. People were variables that could not be quantified in meaningful ways. "Your social structures are emotionally driven," Zixter said. "The investment of time and resources in non-productive activities, such as storytelling and physical contact, suggests inefficient use of your limited hours of consciousness. On Valor, we eliminated such wasteful behaviors millennia ago." Powell was quiet for a long moment. Then he smiled again, though something in his expression had shifted. "Perhaps that's the difference between our species," Powell said. "You eliminated waste, but you may have eliminated something else too. Something that makes survival worth the effort." Before Zixter could respond, emergency alarms suddenly screamed across the colony. Red lights flashed in sequences that meant immediate danger. All around the dining hall, humans jumped to their feet with sudden focus and urgency. Powell's gentle expression transformed into that of a commander. His voice became hard and clear. "All personnel to emergency stations. This is not a drill." The humans moved with surprising speed despite their physical limitations. Powell turned to Zixter as he ran toward the command center. "An asteroid has been detected. It's on a collision course with the settlement. Impact in less than 4 hours." Zixter followed Powell toward the command center, and for the first time in 2,000 years, the ancient Valorian felt something unexpected rising in their chest. Something that was not quite fear, but was not indifference either. It was the recognition that this settlement, these humans, and everything they had struggled to build would soon be destroyed. And Zixter realized they were about to witness how humans responded to true catastrophe. The command center was a controlled frenzy of human activity. Screens displayed trajectories and impact calculations in red and orange colors that seemed designed to inspire urgency. Captain Powell moved between stations, issuing commands in a voice that was steady despite the crisis. Around him, humans worked with the kind of focus that Zixter had to admit was impressive. Confirmation on impact time? Powell called out. A young woman at the communications terminal nodded rapidly. 3 hours and 47 minutes, Captain. The asteroid is approximately 2 kilometers in diameter. Impact will occur at the northern settlement zone. Zixter observed the northern zone on the display. That area contained the hydroelectric facility that provided power to the entire settlement, and more importantly, it housed the medical research station where 30 civilians were currently conducting overnight studies. The calculations were grim. There was no evacuation route fast enough to save those people. Powell's jaw clenched as he received this information, but his voice remained controlled. Initiate full evacuation protocol. All southern and eastern zones move to the mountain shelters immediately. Contact the northern zone facility. Tell them to prepare for emergency lockdown. Lieutenant Grace Murphy appeared at Powell's side. She was the security chief, a woman built lean from years of managing the harsh conditions of the planet. She had already pulled up schematics of the evacuation routes. The mountain shelters can hold 6,000 people with basic supplies, Murphy said. We have 5,200 civilians in the evacual zones. But Captain, those 30 people in the medical station. I know, Powell said quietly. Zixter watched this exchange with analytical interest. Powell knew the situation was impossible. By any rational calculation, the captain should accept the loss of 30 lives as unfortunate but inevitable. The preservation of 5,000 civilians was what mattered. This was elementary mathematics, but Powell's next words revealed the fundamental difference between Valorian and human logic. We're not leaving them, he said. Murphy's expression shifted. It was not surprise, Zixter noted. It was something else. Recognition, perhaps. Or acceptance of something she had always known about her captain. I'll need volunteers, Powell continued. Who's willing to go into the northern zone and attempt an extraction? For a moment, there was silence in the command center. Then Murphy stepped forward immediately. Around the room, other humans began volunteering. Engineer Derek Chun, the young man from the dinner, raised his hand. So did Dr. Nathan Hayes, the medical facility's chief physician. Within minutes, a team of 7 humans had volunteered for what was essentially a suicide mission. Zixter felt something unfamiliar stirring in their ancient consciousness. After 2,000 years of existence, after witnessing countless species rise and fall across the galaxy, Zixter had thought they understood the nature of survival. Every species prioritized the majority. Every species made calculated choices that sacrificed the few for the many. It was logical. It was necessary. It was inevitable. Yet here were humans, who were arguably the weakest species in the galaxy, preparing to throw away their lives for 30 people they could not save. The evacuation began immediately. Humans moved with surprising organization despite the panic that Zixter could see in their faces. Parents held children. Elderly humans were helped into transport vehicles. The humans who worked to organize the evacuation showed fear, yes, but they did not let that fear paralyze them. They moved forward. They acted. They continued. Engineer Lisa Warner approached Powell in the command center. She was breathing hard, her expression intense. Captain, I can manually override the hydroelectric system, Warner said. If the asteroid hits while the facility is operating at full capacity, the resulting energy release will trigger a catastrophic cascade. It'll destroy everything north of the ridge and send debris raining down on the settlement proper. If I shut down the system manually, I can prevent that cascade. Powell stared at her. Manual shutdown requires being at the control core. That's 2 kilometers from any shelter. I know, Warner said. You'd never make it out, Powell said. And Zixter heard something in the human's voice that the translator struggled to render. Despair, perhaps. Or something deeper. Probably not, Warner agreed. But if I don't do this, 5,000 people in the southern settlement die when the debris falls. With manual shutdown, you lose the power, but you keep them alive. Powell closed his eyes for a moment. When he opened them again, they were wet with what Zixter's sensors identified as tears. The captain gripped Warner's shoulder. "Thank you," he said. It was all he could say. Warner nodded and turned toward the transport vehicle that would take her to the hydroelectric facility. She did not run. She did not hesitate. She walked with the kind of determination that Zixter had never before witnessed in a weaker species. The rescue team assembled quickly. Powell would lead. Murphy and Derek Chun would accompany him. They gathered emergency equipment and studied the fastest routes to the medical research station. The journey would take 45 minutes under normal conditions. They had less than 2 hours as the rescue team prepared to depart. Zixter observed humans saying goodbye to each other. A woman kissed Derek Chun on the cheek and whispered something too quiet for the translator to catch. He held her close for a moment, then released her and moved toward the transport vehicle. His expression was calm, but Zixter detected the irregular pulse in his neck. The human was terrified, and yet he went anyway. Dr. Nathan Hayes packed a medical kit with hands that shook slightly. He selected pain medication, sedatives, and comfort supplies. Someone asked him if he thought he would need such materials. "I don't know if we'll get out," Hayes said honestly. "But if we don't, those 30 people shouldn't suffer. They should have someone there. Someone to hold their hand if it comes to that." The transport vehicles departed for the mountains, and the rescue mission departed toward the northern zone. Zixter stood in the command center watching the screens that showed the asteroid's inexorable approach. 1 hour and 38 minutes until impact. Powell's voice came through the communication system from the rescue vehicle. He was calm, giving status reports and encouraging the evacuation to continue. But Zixter could hear something underneath the captain's words. Fear. Genuine, profound fear. Zixter accessed the historical database in their personal tablet. They searched for examples of this behavior throughout human history. Humans running into burning buildings to save strangers. Humans throwing themselves in front of weapons to protect others. Humans volunteering for dangerous missions with full knowledge of the consequences. The pattern repeated throughout human civilization across all cultures and all eras. And Zixter realized something that contradicted 2,000 years of Valorian philosophy. These humans, small and fragile and emotionally driven, were not weak. They were terrified, but they acted anyway. They understood that they would likely die, but they tried to save others despite that knowledge. The asteroid appeared on visual display as a massive rock hurtling toward the settlement. The command center went quiet. Everyone watched. Everyone waited. Everyone feared. Zixter felt their hearts increase pace in response to the human fear around them. Something inside the ancient Valorian was changing, and they did not know whether to welcome it or reject it. The asteroid struck with a force that shattered the command center windows. The world became thunder and fire and chaos. The impact struck like the end of the world. The command center shook violently, throwing humans against walls and scattering equipment across the floor. Zixter's balance systems compensated for the violent movement, but the human operators around the alien were thrown down like toys. Screens exploded into showers of sparks. The ceiling cracked open, revealing the dust-filled sky above. For 7 terrible seconds, the world was nothing but destruction. Then silence returned, broken only by the sound of alarms and human voices calling out in pain and confusion. Emergency lighting batted the command center in an eerie red glow. Zixter stood unchanged while humans around them struggled to their feet, checking for injuries, trying to restart systems that no longer functioned. The communication systems were compromised. There was no contact with the rescue team. There was no word from the northern zone. For 2 hours, Zixter stood in the damaged command center while humans worked with desperate urgency to restore communications, to determine the status of their people, to understand what was still alive. Lieutenant Murphy's second in command, a woman named Sarah, coordinated search and rescue efforts. She moved through the ruins of the command center, issuing orders with the kind of calm focus that reminded Zixter of Powell's own leadership. But Zixter could see the doubt in her eyes, the fear that the rescue team had not survived, the uncertainty about the people in the northern zone. "Get me video feed from the ridge cameras," Sarah commanded. "I need to see the impact zone." When the cameras came online, they showed devastation. The northern zone had been obliterated. The hydroelectric facility was a burning wreck of twisted metal and shattered concrete. The medical research station had been directly in the path of the asteroid impact. From what Zixter could see, nothing in that entire area remained intact. "They're gone," someone whispered, a human voice cracking with despair. "The rescue team is gone. Everyone in the northern zone is gone." Sarah did not respond immediately. She stared at the screen showing the destruction, and Zixter could see her jaw tighten. But then she straightened her shoulders and turned back to the rest of the command crew. "We don't know that," she said firmly. "We don't know anything until we search. Get rescue teams mobilized. Now." The humans who could still function began organizing rescue efforts. Some moved toward the surface to search for survivors. Others worked to restore communications. The mountain shelters reported that the evacuation was complete. 5,000 civilians were safe. But the cost of that safety remained unknown. 4 hours after the impact, Zixter was still standing at the observation window when a figure appeared through the dust and smoke of the destruction. Then another, and another. The rescue team emerged from the devastation like ghosts. Captain Powell was limping, his uniform burned and torn. Lieutenant Murphy supported his weight with one arm, her own leg clearly injured. Behind them came Derek Chun, carrying a medical emergency pod. And walking behind them all, Engineer Lisa Warner, moving slowly but moving, emerged from the wreckage of the hydroelectric facility. Behind them came other figures, some walking, some being supported by others. The medical research team, the 30 civilians they had been sent to save. The command center erupted in chaos. But it was a different kind of chaos than before. This was humans screaming with relief and joy. This was humans weeping with gratitude. This was humans embracing each other despite their injuries and exhaustion, and the unprocessed trauma they had just survived. Dr. Nathan Hayes limped into the medical facility and immediately began treating injuries, despite the fact that he was himself bleeding from a cut above his eye. When someone pointed this out, Hayes simply shook his head and continued working. His patients mattered more than his own pain. Engineer Lisa Warner sat down on the floor once she reached the shelter. She did not move. She did not speak. But when someone approached to check on her injuries, she looked up and said only, "Everyone in the facility is safe." The cascade would have killed thousands. It was worth it. Zixter watched all of this with systems, running analytical processes that could not quite categorize what they were observing. These humans had risked everything. They had stepped into the face of death and acted anyway. They had succeeded, but the success was by the smallest possible margin. Another few minutes, and they would all have been killed. Another miscalculation, and the entire settlement would have been destroyed. Powell was brought to the medical station, bleeding and exhausted. Hayes tended to his injuries, despite Powell's protests that others needed help more urgently. When Powell argued, Hayes simply continued his work without responding to the captain's words. That evening, in what remained of the command center, the surviving humans gathered. There was a memorial service for the three who had died. Humans Zixter had not met stood and spoke about these people. They spoke about their qualities, their laughter, their kindness, the impact their lives had made on others. And then they spoke about the rescue team, about Powell and Murphy and Derek and Warner and Hayes, about the volunteers who had gone into the darkness, knowing they likely would not return. The other humans did not thank them as one might thank a crew member for completing an assignment. They wept for them. They held each other. They spoke of how these people had risked everything because they believed every life mattered. Captain Powell stood among the grieving humans, still injured and barely able to remain upright, and he did not accept gratitude. He did not speak of the difficult calculations he had made. He said only, "They were our people. We don't leave our people behind. That's who we are. That's what it means to be human." Zixter approached the gathering as it was concluding. The humans parted respectfully to allow the Valorian access to Powell. The captain looked up, exhaustion written across every feature of his face. "Your rescue mission accomplished its objective," Zixter said. 30 civilians were saved. The cascade was prevented. 2,300 humans would have perished if the hydroelectric facility had not been manually shut down. From a purely rational perspective, your calculations were correct. Powell stared at the Valorian. There was something in his expression that Zixter could not quite understand. Sadness, yes. Exhaustion, certainly. But there was something else. Something that looked almost like pity. "We didn't do it from a rational perspective," Powell said quietly. "We did it because those 30 people matter. Not because of statistics or calculations. Because they are people. Because every single human life has value beyond what it contributes to survival rates." Zixter's processors worked rapidly to analyze this statement. It was inefficient logic. It was emotionally driven decision-making. It was everything that the Valorian civilization had worked to transcend. And yet, watching these humans hold each other in the rubble of their world, Zixter could not dismiss it as mere weakness. Something was happening inside the ancient alien. Something that had been sleeping for 2,000 years was beginning to wake. Fear, Zixter realized. They were experiencing fear. Not fear of physical danger, but fear of understanding that they had been incomplete for all these millennia. Zixter spent the following days in what humans called the library. It was a simple room with terminals connected to humanity's cultural database. The Valorian diplomat accessed files that had previously seemed irrelevant to any serious analysis: art, music, literature, philosophy, history. Zixter began with human wars. Conflicts fought not for resources or territorial advantage, but for ideas. Wars fought because one group believed different humans should have freedom. Wars fought because people believed slavery was wrong. Wars fought because humans would rather die than allow their principles to be violated. The Valorians had transcended such wasteful conflicts millennia ago. They had engineered all biological drives toward aggression and tribalism out of their species. They had achieved perfect rational cooperation. They had never fought a war in 3,000 years, and yet they had also never sacrificed for an ideal. They had never risked anything for something beyond their own survival. Zixter accessed human art next. Paintings and sculptures created from grief and rage and love and loss. Humans spent enormous energy creating things that serve no practical purpose beyond evoking emotion. A human artist might spend months on a single painting that would never house a person or feed a community. And yet these paintings were displayed in places of honor. Humans gathered to view them and speak about how they made them feel. The Valorians had such things too, but they were purely mathematical. Perfect geometric designs that could be analyzed and appreciated for their logical elegance. Efficiency and order translated into visual form. Nothing more. But human art was different. A painting of a sunset on Earth conveyed not information but longing. A sculpture of a human figure expressed vulnerability and strength, and something that transcended rational analysis. The Valorians had eliminated art that was merely emotional. They had kept only what could be justified through logic. Zixter accessed human music next. Symphonies with no purpose beyond moving the human heart. Songs about love and loss and hope. Rhythms and melodies that seemed designed purely to evoke response rather than communicate information. Humans listened to this music and weep or danced or sat in contemplative silence for hours. Zixter experienced human music. And something in the ancient alien began to shift. A human named Marcus approached the library on the 4th day after the asteroid impact. He was older than most of the younger colony members, with gray hair and a body shaped by work and age. He moved slowly, as if each step was considered and deliberate. "I'm Marcus," he said. His voice was gentle. "I heard that you were spending time in the library. I wanted to tell you about something, if you're interested." Zixter considered declining, but something in Marcus's manner suggested that refusal would be disrespectful. "Proceed." Marcus pulled up a file. It showed a human child, perhaps 4 years old, with dark hair and a serious expression. The file noted that this child had arrived on the colony as an orphan. Both parents killed when a structure had collapsed during construction accidents. "This is Sarah," Marcus said. "My granddaughter was her closest friend." Sarah was alone in the world with no family on the colony. The colony council could have allocated her to basic housing with other orphans and assigned her minimum resources. She would have been fed and sheltered. She would have survived. Zixter waited for Marcus to continue. "Instead, my family adopted her. All 37 families with children on this colony who had space and resources took in additional children. We stretch our resources. Our housing becomes cramped. Our food rations become tighter. From a rational perspective, it is inefficient." "Why did you do this?" Zixter asked. "Because Sarah needed a family," Marcus said simply. "Because a child should not be alone. Because love is worth the cost." He closed the file and looked directly at Zixter. "You see everything in terms of efficiency and rational calculation. That's how your people work. But humans don't calculate the value of a child against the resources required to raise them. We just love them. We just decide that they matter more than efficiency." Zixter processed this statement. It was true. The Valorians would never make such a choice. It was illogical. And yet, throughout human history, humans had consistently made exactly this choice. They had prioritized connection and love over efficiency and resource optimization. The next day, Derek Chun requested a conversation with Zixter. The young engineer was moving with difficulty, his injuries from the rescue still healing, but his expression was alert and engaged. "I wanted to tell you about my family," Derek said. "My parents are still on Earth. My sister lives there too. I left them to come to this colony because I wanted to be part of something new, something important. You sacrifice proximity to your family for an unknown opportunity," Zixter observed. "This was logical given your assessment of potential growth." Derek shook his head. "No, I was scared to leave them. I cried when my transport left Earth orbit. But I wanted to help build something. And my family wanted that for me, even though it meant not seeing me for years. Maybe not ever." He pulled up an image file. It showed a woman and a man and another woman who resembled Derek. They were standing together, and all three had red eyes as if they had been crying. "Every few months, I send them messages through the communication relay. It takes months for them to reach Earth. It takes months for the reply to come back. But we keep doing it because we're family. Because love doesn't stop being love just because distance gets in the way." Zixter accessed the message files. They were simple text transmitted across the vast emptiness of space. Derek's parents describing their lives. Derek responding with stories about the colony. Expressions of love. Statements of missing each other. Hopes for the future. None of it was rational. None of it served any survival function. It was pure emotion crossing the void of space, simply because humans needed to connect to people they loved. Dr. Nathan Hayes found Zixter in the observation area, overlooking the recovery efforts. The medical facility had been partially restored, and humans worked steadily to repair the damage caused by the asteroid impact. "I've been treating people for 3 days now," Hayes said. "People with injuries that will take weeks to heal. People with scars that will never fully fade. People who lost friends and family in that impact. You are fulfilling your function as a medical professional," Zixter stated. "No," Hayes said firmly. "I'm holding the hands of people I care about. I'm looking in their eyes and telling them they will survive. I'm listening to their fear and their grief, and I'm telling them that they are not alone. That's not medicine. That's human connection." Hayes turned to face the Valorian directly. "You watched us risk everything for 30 people we could have abandoned. You've been trying to understand it through logic and efficiency calculations. But you're missing the actual point. We did it because we couldn't live with ourselves if we didn't. Because leaving people behind would have destroyed something in us that matters more than survival." That night, Zixter accessed their personal files from the Valorian archives. Historical records of Valorian civilization dating back 5,000 years. 2,000 years ago, there was a period of transition where the Valorians began engineering emotions out of their biology. Fear was first, then anger, then grief, then love, then compassion. The historical records noted these changes as progress. The elimination of irrational emotions had allowed the Valorians to become more logical, more efficient, more powerful. And it allowed them to build a perfect society based on pure reason. But there was one record that Zixter had never fully processed before. A final log entry from Calith, the Valorian scientist who had designed the genetic modifications that eliminated fear from their species. The entry was dated the day before Calith underwent the transformation. "I fear what we are doing," the ancient Valorian had written. "I fear that we are eliminating something essential in the pursuit of perfection. Fear is connected to love. Fear is what makes us care, whether we live or die. Fear is what makes us want to protect others. I fear that we are becoming something great, but losing something precious in the process." The next day, the logs recorded that Calith underwent the modification. The fear was removed. The entry ended. There were no more personal reflections. Calith had become fully Valorian, perfectly logical, perfectly efficient, and completely incapable of genuine fear or genuine love. Zixter stood at the observation window, watching humans work and rest and comfort each other. And for the first time in their 2,000 years of existence, the ancient Valorian understood what Calith must have felt in those final moments before the modification. They understood what they had given up. Zixter worked on the formal report throughout the week. The Valorian diplomat sat in a temporary office with walls still showing dust from the asteroid impact, translating human behavior into the precise logical language that the Galactic Council expected. But this report would be different from every other report Zixter had written in 2000 years. This report would challenge everything the Valorian civilization had built itself upon. Captain Powell entered the office as Zixter was completing the final sections. The captain was still injured, but walking without assistance. His recovery faster than Zixter's medical analysis had predicted. The human capacity for resilience was remarkable. "How goes the evaluation?" Powell asked. "I am completing my report," Zixter said. "It will be transmitted to the Galactic Council within the hour. The content will require significant revision of our current understanding of your species." Powell stepped closer and asked if he could read what Zixter had written. The Valorian had expected resistance to such a request, but the gesture seemed appropriate. Powell had shown the alien nothing but openness since this encounter began. Zixter displayed the report on the screen. The report began with standard observations. Settlement 7 had sustained critical damage but was recoverable. Population survival rate exceeded initial projections. Resource management was adequate given the circumstances. But then the language shifted. The humans of Kepler-442b possess a form of strength that transcends technological capability or physical adaptation. In the presence of catastrophic danger, these humans did not engage in rational self-preservation. Instead, they prioritized the safety of others over their own survival. This behavior pattern is not unique to this colony, but appears throughout human civilization across all historical periods. The report continued with analysis of human decision-making. It documented how humans consistently chose to invest resources and energy in pursuits that serve no survival function: art, music, literature, philosophy, family, relationships that required sacrifice without return. These pursuits were inefficient by Valorian standards, yet they were central to human civilization. Humans define themselves not through rational efficiency, but through their capacity to care for others. They measure their lives not through productivity metrics, but through relationships and connections. They find meaning in sacrifice. They find purpose in love. Powell read in silence. Zixter waited down when Powell finished. The captain looked up at the Valorian with an expression that Zixter's sensors identified as respect. "Is this what you truly believe?" Powell asked. "It is what I have observed," Zixter replied. "I came to this colony believing your species was primitive and emotionally driven. This assessment was factually correct but profoundly incomplete. You are emotionally driven. But this characteristic does not represent weakness. It represents a different form of strength." That evening, the colony held a gathering in the restored Central Hall. All the survivors had been invited. The Valorian diplomatic team was offered seats of honor, though Zixter felt that the honor was misplaced. The humans were the ones who deserved recognition. As the gathering began, humans brought Zixter gifts. Children drew pictures. Scientists presented research findings. Engineers showed designs and innovations. Artists performed music. None of these gifts had material value. But Zixter's systems registered the emotional significance in the humans' faces as they offered them. Then Captain Powell stepped forward with something held carefully in his hands. It was a stone, small enough to fit in a palm. The surface was carved with patterns that Powell explained were symbols from ancient human civilizations. The stone itself had been brought from Earth, passed down through generations of humans before arriving on this colony. "This is a grounding stone," Powell explained. "For thousands of years, humans have carried stones like this as reminders. Reminders of home. Reminders of family. Reminders of what connects us to things bigger than ourselves." Powell extended the stone toward Zixter. "We want you to carry this with you, as a reminder that humans, for all our fragility, have something worth protecting, something worth fighting for, something worth the fear." Zixter took the stone. The weight of it was negligible, but the gesture was enormous. The ancient alien held the stone and felt something building behind their eyes. Zixter's physiology did not produce tears. The Valorians had engineered that response out of their biology long ago. And yet Zixter felt the pressure of what might be tears if their genetics had allowed such a response. The report was transmitted to the Galactic Council the next morning. Zixter's personal addendum was marked Priority 1 for council review. 3 days later, Zixter's departure was scheduled. The diplomatic team gathered at the landing platform. But before boarding, Zixter requested one final conversation with Powell. The captain met the alien at the edge of the settlement, looking out over the recovery efforts and the humans working together to rebuild. "Your report will be controversial," Powell said. It was not a question. "Yes," Zixter agreed. "The Valorian Council has built our entire civilization on the foundation that emotional response is inferior to rational calculation. This report suggests that we were incorrect. This report suggests that we achieved technological advancement, but sacrificed something essential in the process." "What will happen?" Powell asked. "I do not know," Zixter said. "The council will deliberate. There will be debate. Some will argue that I have been compromised by extended exposure to human irrationality. Others may question whether the Valorian path has been correct." Powell smiled slightly. "That's already more than we could ask for." Zixter gripped the stone from Earth. The ancient alien looked at this small human, so fragile and temporary, and understood something that 2,000 years of logic had never revealed. "I will tell you something that will never appear in any official report," Zixter said. "When the asteroid was approaching, I experienced something that I had never experienced before. I was afraid. Not for myself, but for your survival. For this colony. For the people I had dismissed as primitive. Fear isn't bad," Powell said gently. "Fear is just the evidence that we care about something more than ourselves." "Yes," Zixter agreed. "I understand that now. The Valorians eliminated fear because we believed it was weakness. But fear is not weakness. Fear is love in its rawest form. Fear is the proof that another being's survival matters more to us than our own safety." The transport ship was ready for departure. Zixter's team waited aboard. The ancient Valorian turned to depart, but paused one final time. "I will carry this stone always," Zixter said. "Not as a reminder of your colony, but as a reminder of everything my people sacrificed to achieve perfection. And as a reminder that perfection without compassion is simply emptiness." Zixter boarded the ship and watched through the viewport as the settlement receded below. The humans watched the departure from the ground. Small figures raising their hands in farewell. The ancient Valorian sat in the observation deck with the stone held carefully. And for the first time in 2,000 years, Zixter was not certain that the Valorian path had been the correct path. For the first time, Zixter wondered if the greatest strength was not the elimination of fear, but the willingness to act despite it. The report reached the Galactic Council and triggered debates that would reshape how younger species were evaluated. Some Valorians rejected the conclusions. Others began to question the cost of their perfection. And in a colony on Kepler 442b, humans continued their work, knowing that they had changed more than their settlement. They had begun to change the galaxy's understanding of what made a civilization truly advanced. Fear had taught Zixter what 10,000 years of logic could not. Humanity, the smallest and most fragile species, had shown the strongest and most advanced species what it meant to truly understand strength. The stone from Earth remained in Zixter's hands as the ship carried the ancient diplomat back to Valor. And for the first time in millennia, the oldest civilization in the galaxy began to wonder if they had made a terrible mistake in learning not to be afraid.